Gentlemen, today, as I welcome all 93 persons who have joined us so far today, I would like to take us to our very first presentation for the morning. As indicated earlier, I ask you to, as I apologize for the absence of the Honorable Secretary General and also Dr. Roger Currenteng, who unfortunately were unable to confirm because they're presently on official duties in Africa. I'd like to invite our very first presenter. Our first presenter this morning is Ms. Candice Welsch. She's a Deputy Director in the Division for Operations of the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime. Ms. Candice Welsch is currently employed as a Deputy Director of the Division for Operations of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC. She oversees UNODC's network of field offices around the world, as well as the Criminal Justice Section and the Health Branch. Ms. Welsch was previously employed as the Chief of the Implementation Support Section of the Corruption and Economic Crime Branch. She led a team based in both Vienna and the field that provided technical assistance to countries in preventing and combating corruption. Ms. Welsch also held positions in the Justice Section and the Organized Crime and Illicit Trafficking Branch of UNODC, where her work focused primarily on issues relating to criminal justice, piracy off the coast of Somalia, human trafficking, and international cooperation in criminal matters. Prior to her employment at UNODC, Ms. Welsch worked as a senior legal officer to the judges of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, a UN-backed international war crimes tribunal. Ms. Welsch was a federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice Canada. She prosecuted cases related to drugs and organized crime, and worked in the central authority responsible for extradition and mutual legal assistance with countries around the world. Ms. Welsch has an LLM in International Criminal Justice from University of London, a master's degree in International Law, Université de Paul Cézanne, law degrees in both Common Law and Civil Law, McGill University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Politics from Queen's University. Ladies and gentlemen, might I invite Ms. Candice Welsch to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to join you for this virtual conference of the Commonwealth Caribbean Association of Integrity Commissions and Anti-Corruption Bodies, although I wish we could be together in person in one of your beautiful countries. I welcome this opportunity to further strengthen UNODC's engagement with you. Associations such as the Commonwealth Caribbean Association are so important in allowing anti-corruption bodies to come together, to share lessons learned and ideas on how to strengthen your critical work in preventing and combating corruption. In many ways, 2021 is the year of anti-corruption. For the first time ever, the United Nations General Assembly held a special session just earlier this month that led to the adoption by the General Assembly of a high-level political declaration entitled Our Common Commitment to Effectively Address Challenges and Implementing Measures to Prevent and Combat Corruption and Strengthen International Cooperation. The declaration is a very detailed document. It's literally 16 pages long, that sets out what progress we as the international community have achieved in fighting corruption, and also makes clear commitments on what we need to do better. The preparatory process for the special session was extremely inclusive. In addition to the contributions received by member states, The conference received 46 contributions from organizations in the UN system, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, academia, and the private sector. The declaration underlines that the UN Convention Against Corruption is the world's only globally legally binding anti-corruption instrument that has near universal adherence with 187 state parties. As Dirk has outlined, the convention offers a global tool to fight a global problem based on a shared understanding of that problem and the concrete steps that are needed to address it, from introducing and implementing effective legislation to building national capacities and strengthening international cooperation to enable cross-border responses and to recover stolen assets. The declaration addresses additional important points, including on topics such as transparent, free, and fair elections, on beneficial ownership transparency, on measures to ensure the financial systems are not being abused, on access to information and transparency. There are many other articles on strengthening informal and formal international cooperation to make them more effective and efficient, and on ensuring that asset recovery efforts are successful. We're stepping up efforts to enhance international cooperation through a newly established global operational network of anti-corruption law enforcement authorities called the GLOBE Network, which will work together to bring practitioners and establish trust among them so that they are ready to cooperate on complex and sensitive corruption cases. The international community also recognized that transparency and anti-corruption are key to achieving the whole of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. The links between preventing corruption and ensuring the rule of law and the protection of human rights are emphasized throughout the declaration, which I think is a big step forward in recognizing the importance of the work that you do in your countries and that your counterparts do around the world. The high-level political declaration further underlined the role of anti-corruption bodies when responding to or recovering from national crises and emergencies, including the recovery efforts in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to the medical emergency that's been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Bank estimated that the global economy contracted by 4.3% in 2020, making this the deepest global recession in 8 decades. Estimates show that the equivalent of 255 million full-time jobs worldwide were lost due to the pandemic, resulting in an increase in global unemployment of 33 million people. Further, approximately 100 million people were pushed into extreme poverty as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. These numbers are staggering, and recovery depends on the quick, effective impact measures designed to resolve the crisis while cushioning the economic loss. To address the economic, humanitarian, and governance crises caused by forced shutdowns, the International Monetary Fund estimated that as of April 2021, approximately $16 trillion has been allocated by governments for fiscal support globally. According to the UN Conference on Trade and Development, an economic aid package of $2.5 trillion American would have to be made available to help curb the pandemic's disastrous effects on many developing countries. The vast amounts of resources allocated to respond to the urgent needs presented by the crisis, combined with relaxed oversight and accountability measures, also create ample opportunities for corruption to grow and thrive. Rapidly shifting priorities, disrupted supply chains, and a lack of information and accessibility, among other issues, further exacerbate the crisis and increase corruption risks. We've already seen examples of corruption having resulted in poor quality healthcare or low quality personal protective equipment, and there have been protests in numerous countries around the world on this. Now more than ever, therefore, governments need to use the tools provided by the UN Convention Against Corruption to further strengthen anti-corruption bodies, to improve oversight over stimulus investments, and to increase transparency and accountability. UNODC has fast-tracked assistance to member states requesting advice to strengthen the financial and fiscal integrity frameworks during the pandemic. We have published guidelines on accountability in the prevention of corruption and the allocation and distribution of emergency economic response packages, as well as guidance on the manufacturing, allocation, and distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine. Even before COVID-19, corruption risks demonstrated that efforts to combat and prevent corruption have not yet been enough. As outlined in the UN Common Position Paper to address global corruption, complex multi-jurisdictional corruption scandals perpetrated by organized networks involved in the public, private, and informal sectors have in some cases traced to the highest levels of government, resulting in the loss of enormous amounts of resources and undermining public trust in democracy and the rule of law. Such schemes were rarely detected and failed to result in investigation, prosecution, and conviction, compounded by persistent challenges in the identification, tracing, and recovery of stolen assets. Those involved in identifying, investigating, and reporting on corruption remain at risk of retaliation and reprisals. And the prevalence of corruption and impunity in corrupt practices have negatively impacted on people's trust in institutions and in political processes, eroding social cohesion and fueling instability and conflict. The United Nations have adopted a common position on corruption, which was developed by a UN Global Task Force on Corruption that was led by UNODC, along with the UN Department of Political and Peacekeeping Affairs, as well as UNDP, and which aims to improve the delivery and impact of anti-corruption support to member states. The task force has identified two priorities in particular, namely the need to ground anti-corruption principles in national, local, and sectoral development work, including to address health, education, water and sanitation, infrastructure and construction, climate change, and the judiciary. And secondly, the importance of tackling large-scale transnational corruption cases involving vast quantities of assets and often high-level, sophisticated corrupt networks. The UN Convention Against Corruption and its peer review mechanism have raised awareness and kept corruption high on the international agenda. 71% of the states that have participated in the review mechanism have reported that the reviews have helped them to identify gaps in their national anti-corruption frameworks. And 87% of states have reported that they have taken measures to address the findings from the mechanism to strengthen their own frameworks. To date, the findings of the review mechanism have helped to identify more than 3,800 technical assistance needs in 108 countries. As guardian to the convention and the secretariat of the Conference of the States Parties, UNODC provided more than 140 countries with capacity building assistance and trained around 1,200 officials from more than 70 countries in prevention, investigation, and prosecution of corruption offenses over the last year. UNODC has also increased its focus on addressing the gender dimensions of corruption, as well as the role of technology. Diversity, equal representation, and gender equality are powerful protective factors against corruption. Women also suffer specific impacts of corruption, and responses need to take their needs and voices into account. The use of information and communications technologies to prevent and fight corruption is a new opportunity for all of us. Big data, information and communications technologies, such as machine learning, blockchain, cloud-based platforms, biometrics, and fintech, or financial technology, offer new solutions for preventing and detecting corruption. On a broader level, I would like to highlight that UNODC has just adopted a new strategy for the organization for 2021 to 2025, which sets out the priorities of our work and how we want to improve ourselves in order to achieve those goals. More importantly for you, this is being followed up with the development of a complementary strategic vision for Latin America and the Caribbean. Consultations on its development have been ongoing for the last 6 months, reaching thousands of national counterparts, and the strategic vision will be launched in September of this year. Not surprisingly, fighting corruption was identified as a priority by every country in the entire region. We intend to use this strategic vision to solidify our presence on the ground and to improve our work in cooperation with authorities such as yourselves across Latin America and the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the opportunity in 2021 to strengthen anti-corruption action in the pandemic response and recovery, and to build resilient societies able to withstand the threats and challenges of tomorrow. UNODC looks forward to working with you and supporting you to undertake your critical work. Many thanks once again for inviting me to join you today. I'm sure you will have extremely fruitful discussions over these next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Candice. I do hope that on the next occasion, certainly your presentation to the association will be done face to face. I note importantly the great work that's been done by the UNODC, and certainly I can only commend to our colleagues to continue to rely upon, to reach out to, and to seek guidance from the UNODC in all matters. I thank you so much for your presentation, and I certainly would like to ask you if you would be prepared to field questions. I'm not certain if there are any questions as I seek to manipulate this screen, which seems to not want to be cooperative. I just ask for a moment. Presently, we have 100 attendees at our webinar session. Do we have any questions from the members? At this time, there are no questions, but I shall pose the very first one, Candice. Having listened to your excellent presentation and looking certainly at the dynamics that have evolved, so to speak, with the pandemic. On the one hand, persons may be minded to think that because of the pandemic, the perception of corruption or actual acts of corruption would be on the decline. My first question to you, has there been any gauge or thermometer that has been brought any reading in respect of what has happened during the last 18 months? Is it decreasing the perception of corruption, or is it increasing at a decreasing rate? How would you characterize the perception and actual corruption as regards reports that you have received globally?
Thank you very much, Dirk. And it's a very good question. I think a lot of this is still very much a work in progress, as we understand the full impact of it. But I've even seen, our headquarters is in Austria, which you might think is a country that doesn't have challenges this way. But even here, there have been a number of scandals of things where, and I think, governments wanted to move quickly. So there have been scandals around things like obtaining of, giving certain government funding to masks, the manufacturers of masks. And there were some that were found out that actually they weren't really manufacturing Austrian masks. They were importing them from China and putting an Austrian stamp on them. And, these kinds of things, which again, you'd think wouldn't happen, that there would be controls around something as important as protective equipment at this time. And certainly there are, we've seen it across Latin America, and in some other regions as well, where there are concerns about the rollout of the vaccine, about gaps in the medical system that have been very alarming, in countries such as India or Brazil that should have the medical capabilities to handle the crisis and have struggled. So I think this is something where there's still a lot of information coming in. I don't know if we'll know for sure, but I think certainly the risks are there to make corruption more prevalent. And I think it's also hard for many of us have struggled to understand how we can do our jobs and be as effective as we normally would be when we're stuck at home behind a computer. And I think that sort of lack of oversight, that, the ability to have the hands-on kind of oversight we normally would, creates that risk. But I think it'll be some time before we have the full numbers on whether there has in fact been an increase. I think on the perception, there probably has been, because it only takes some of these scandals to kind of create that perception that corruption is worse. But I think we'll see the data over whether there have been increases in the times to come. But I think, as I'd highlighted, there certainly are risks there, which is why UNODC did develop these tools and tried to develop them very quickly, looking at the emergency responses, and also now in the development and the rollout of the vaccine. And hopefully that these allow us to work with countries to try to mitigate these risks and make sure that we can work together to have the oversight that's needed to prevent any increases in corruption at this time when we really can't afford to have
any. Thank you so much. Candice, could I just ask you to speak a little more on the tool that has been developed, and in respect of the rollout, how would SIDS, how would the small island developing states access the tool or be able to get some more information on the tool, on the kit?
Sure. It's if you on the UNODC website, they're on the corruption page, but there's a specific COVID-19 page, and I'm happy to, I don't know how to do it exactly, but I could email it to you maybe, and you can post it on the link where to find things. So there are papers that have been written, one of them specifically on COVID-19 vaccinations and corruption risks around that. And that really looks at the chain of the development of how to prevent corruption in its manufacture, how to decide its allocation and distribution. So there's a specific paper on that. There are also some that were developed for specific regions, as well as the G20 also developed. We worked with the G20 to develop a compendium on good practices on preventing corruption in the response to COVID-19. And then there's also a third paper on this around the fiscal response. So about the increased benefits that were being paid to people, and trying to respond quickly to that, and how to prevent corruption in those. So all of those papers are available publicly on UNODC's website. They're all in English, and some of them I believe are also in French and Spanish that are available there. So hopefully those can be of assistance. And if there's any other follow-up, I would be delighted to be able to refer people to my colleagues that have really worked on developing these and rolling these out, that we can provide whatever support that's needed.
Okay. Thank you, Candice. My final question, as Deputy Director, how would SIDS and all other colleagues who are present, if they need assistance, if they need guidance, if they need to reach out to UNODC in their own country to get some sort of technical support, what is the avenue that SIDS or other Commonwealth countries can use to get guidance from UNODC?
So essentially, we work different ways. As you know, we have offices based in the field. And so obviously those can be contacted directly. And we have the regional office for Central America and the Caribbean that's based in Panama City. But we also have some offices in the Dominican Republic and in Barbados as well. So colleagues can be contacted there. Otherwise, colleagues can be contacted globally. My email is fine, and I'll refer you to the right people, or anyone else. There's also on our website, there's sort of the more general emails. But either of those routes will work, and we'll make sure that you get the support you need from the experts that you need to be able to work with.
Thank you so very much. Candice, thank you for your presentation. At this time, there are no questions. It was well received and, as usual, excellent. So there's no way for anyone to ask a question of you. Thank you so much. I hope you'll be able to join us throughout the session. I think we have some very provocative and very resourceful presentations to follow. Please, thank you so much, and good seeing you again.
It's my greatest pleasure to be here and to see you again, Dirk. Thank you.